Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 236 of Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. I'm one of your two co-hosts, Tom Hunyadi. You may know me from my other show, Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast. And I am joined by my partner in crime, my backers traveler. He is Zandy Nichols. Zandy, my friend.
Hello, Thomas. Coming to you from this 1995 circa internet buffering stream episode of Two Legs. I'm well, folks. If you're watching this, it's a little bit of a shit show because we've got some snafus technology-wise, but we're here and we can be heard, and I'm doing well, and I'm happy to be on here, and I'm thrilled to have a returning guest and author with us today.
Yeah, I mean, he's been very busy lately. We all know he's got the YouTube book out. He's got the George Harrison in the 70s book out. He's writing for many publications, including Culture Sonar. And he just wrote, and he's going to tell us about it, a piece in this standalone Paul McCartney magazine. And Eoghan Lyng is returning, and he's been a staple on Ken Michaels recently. And he's everywhere. And that's great because the man is filled with opinions, and we love him. He is Eoghan Lyng. Eoghan, my friend, how you been? And tell us about this new piece that you just wrote.
Well, as you say, I've been here, there, and everywhere.
Yes.
Well, I've done some pieces for Record Collector with Darryl Easley in the past, and he emailed me to say would I like to write a piece on the new album, as in the 2013 album, not the album that Paul McCartney's working on right now. And it was a no-brainer. I mean, of course, I want to be in this magazine, and I realized that the hook was to be on my way to work in early days. So it's a very reflective album, and it ends with a piece where I said he had looked at it back in the past. Surely now he could live in the present.
Right. Very good. Very good.
You may know Dino Viscera. He also contributed.
Yes. Yeah, Dino's been pretty vocal, especially about the whole McCartney 3 reissues, and he's started a brand new Facebook page where you can go and post your pictures on the all the 3 variants on that. So check that out if you haven't already.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Tom. Oh, and you also just did an appearance with Ken on Ken's channel about Tug of War too, right?
Yeah, that was the piece with Dino Viscera and a guy called Beatletone. He's got a YouTube channel. So it was 2 Englishmen, an Irishman, and Ken Michaels.
Yes, we know Beatletone very well. He's a friend of ours, and Eoghan. I really did enjoy the Tug of War piece that you guys did with Ken Michaels. Very good, very well done. And you're here today to do part 2 of our look at Paul and George's relationship through the press, through albums and whatnot. And during this time, we're going to do 76, I think, through 81. And it's not a really big, heavy back and forth period, kind of like the John and Paul period, back in the early 70s. But there's some really good sound bites out there, some good bits. They're both steadily doing interviews during this time. So there is always that chance that you'll see them talk about each other, in these pieces. Talk about George from like 76 and 81 for a minute, Eoghan.
George in 76 to 81. Well, I suppose the biggest thing is that he founded Handmade by the end of the 70s, which and that came from the most accidental of circumstances. He just wanted to watch Life of Brian. The Pythons couldn't get it funded, so he mortgages his house to see the greatest biblical film never told and all that. Yeah. He releases 2 albums. He releases 3 albums between 76 to 81. There's the best of them is the George Harrison album, which came out in 79, which has great tracks like Your Love Is Forever and Blow Away. And of course he gets married, has a kid, and he seems to be in a steadier life than he was in 74 with the Dark Horse tour, which was divorce and cocaine and a really, really terrible American tour.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Very true.
It's interesting. You look at the dynamic. Paul is kind of at his commercial zenith with Wings from between
Yes.
76 and 79. George doesn't have the commercial success, but seems to be at peace with his life, as you mentioned,
Yes,
and a
very
better
much.
place.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think fatherhood was very good for him. I mean, Danny Harrison adored his father. He's nothing but the
Yeah.
best of things to say. A bit like John Lennon with Julian. I mean, fatherhood just brought something out of them. Not Julian, Sean Lennon.
Yes.
Yeah. Very
Right.
much not with Julian.
Yeah, very interesting. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we did the first installment of this, I want to say, probably about a year ago.
It was in July.
Oh, okay, July of 23.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
so it hasn't been as long as I thought. So it's felt like it's been a little bit longer than that, but it's good to have part two.
Yes.
And obviously, we'll see the legs, obviously, as we get through the 90s to get back into this to do a part three, as Tom mentioned. But, I mean, there are a certain amount of, headlines that you can kind of cherry pick and go through between their relationship in the second half of the 70s. Obviously, not nearly as, for lack of a better word, like the first half of the 70s, obviously, was a little more vitriol and press and like the relationship with all the Beatles during that point. But,
Right.
from 76 to 81, the wedding, John's passing, and all that, as we'll get to it.
Yeah, I mean, where it really gets juicy is then come like 82, 83, 84, when, more lawsuits come to light. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. George is very vocal about Paul, throughout the 80s and into the 90s. So those are going to be some interesting quotes during part three. So look forward to that. But there's some interesting stuff here too, starting in 1976. And as we go, I'll try to show the source material where, because I've gone back and here's the 76 Rolling Stone issue right here.
Yep.
And this is June 17th of 1976. And it's been a lot of fun going back and looking at these interviews and seeing where they're at and see if they're telling the same stories that they tell now, especially Paul, because, Paul loves a good story, i.e. Band on the Run and the, We're Not Going to America Without Number One.
All that jazz.
Yeah, all that jazz. But starting off with 76, and in the Rolling Stone magazine, he's being asked about George Harrison's tour, and Paul responds. And Paul tries not to be super critical unless he's being pushed about his ex bandmates, and then he was kind of pushed here, and he said if I had been producing him, if I had been his impresario on the tour, I would have asked him to do a few more songs he was known for, and also to stick to the arrangements a little more, because he did change things up a little bit on that 74 tour. And And Owen, you wrote a little bit about this in your George Harrison book about that 74 tour, changing some lyrics, changing arrangements a little bit, maybe not doing all of the hits that people were hoping he would do to that. Do you think Paul has a point about that, about, maybe he should have done more tracks that he was known for, or sticking to the original arrangements of the songs?
Oh, 100% he should have. If you're, it's one thing to only perform a handful of Beatle tracks, but if you're going to perform them fairly reverently to the originals. I mean, nobody wants to hear this makeover of In My Life to suggest it's a Christian reinterpretation. And if you're going to perform something, perform it as it is on the record. There is that story that in 1991, when he did that tour with Clapton, he performed a different solo, and the entire band said, no, it has to be.
Right.
They hummed the solo for him. I'm not going to hum it for you guys.
Yeah.
But you got to admire in one aspect that he's following the Dylan-esque route of just, subverting everything and changing it up to. But you also have to be respectful to fans who are paying big monies, spending their hard-earned money. Typically bands they might do their new stuff, but for like a 20-minute encore, they just play the hits.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, for 1974, I mean, it's too early in the game to be, I think, as you quoted it there, Owen, like pulling a Bob Dylan. You got to stay. It's too fresh, and in my opinion, I think the '74 tour just should have been. it was bad timing. He just should not have done a tour then. His life was not stable enough for a tour. Maybe later, 75, 76, it would have been better, but it just was not the best timing. Even 73 could have been better.
Mm-hmm.
72 coming hot off the heels of All Things Must Pass.
I agree.
Just the timing of that was just not one of his better decisions.
I mean, he did have the car crash in '72, which Patty Boyd has hinted was a detrimental to their marriage. She intimates that didn't help their marriage. I think she was better. She was more badly injured from the car crash than he was. But nobody comes out of a car crash unscathed. I mean, unfortunately, look at Eric Stewart. I mean, he himself says that he divides his career into like the pre-car crash and the post-car crash. I don't think he ever quite recaptured the creative spark after he had that car crash in 1979. As horrible as it is to say. Yes, I mean, the 10cc work. There was a rapid decline from, say, before the car crash. There was Things We Do for Love, Dreadlock Holiday, all these feel the benefit, all these tremendous tracks, and after that, you don't have that level of commitment. And I would say his best work post the car crash for Eric Stewart was the Press Play album, which of course we've already covered.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Continuing with 76, in September, Ringo releases Ringo's Rotogravure, and both Paul and George contribute tracks for Ringo. George gives Ringo "I'll Still Love You," which ends up becoming a lawsuit, which they've publicly talked about in the future. And then Paul contributes a track called "Pure Gold." Now, for my money. Yeah, for my money, the George track, tramples all over the Paul track, "Pure Gold." I love "I'll Still Love You," even though Ringo wasn't happy with and changed the arrangement to what George brought him, and hence the lawsuit. But I love "I'll Still Love You."
Yeah, that's a great track.
I'm the opposite. I much prefer Pure Gold. I mean, it's very infectious. It's very much the sequel to 6 O'Clock on the Ringo album. I mean, it's very McCartney-esque with the rising melody. Whereas "I Still Love You," I mean, in this arrangement is just anodyne.
All right, fair enough. But there was a video. Ringo does do a video for "I'll Still Love You" during his shaved head, drunken.
Oh God. Was that when he was with Nancy Andrews?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So it's all.
Yeah, exactly.
And every song is sung, and every dream is done.
The lounge act era.
Seriously.
I'll still love you.
There you go.
Thanks very much. I'll be in the bar.
Yeah, yes, he will be. Moving on to 77, and this another interview here for Crawdaddy magazine from 1977. Now, this I got from the George Harrison book. This is from Ashley Kahn, who did the editing on this. He took a bunch of TV spots and interviews that George did through a 20 year or so period of his career, and really good stuff in here. But like I said, this is from February of 1977 from Crawdaddy magazine, and the question, the quote that I'm going to read kind of stems from a beginning conversation about why he's doing a double album, or why he did a double album. To open his solo career with All Things Must Pass, and then the conversation moves to this quote right here, and George is quoted saying, Paul would always help along when you'd done 10 of his songs. Then when we got around doing one of my songs, he would help. It was silly. It was very selfish, actually. Sometimes Paul would make us do these really fruity songs. I mean, my God, Maxwell Silverhammer was so fruity. After a while, we did a good job on it. But when Paul got an idea or an arrangement in his head, but Paul's writing for a 14-year-old audience now, anyhow. So that was I thought
a zinger, man.
Yes,
that is a zinger because it's not true.
Yeah.
Owen,
might
what do you
have.
think about that?
I mean, it's saying a lot. I mean, I mean, Chris Thomas himself has said that he never saw any evidence that they weren't putting in the same level of commitment to George's songs as they were to their own. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, we've seen the Peter Jackson documentary. It looks like Paul McCartney's putting his backbone into the tracks. On like For You Blue, they're like John Lennon's playing this pedaling solo, and I mean, when I interviewed Michael Lindsay Hogg about the Let It Be sessions, which George Harrison came to claim was the nadir or the winter discontent or whatever he said about the Beatles. He said himself that he never thought George Harrison was particularly difficult, but he was just ready to move on. He probably was of the four of them the most ready to move on, and maybe over the years that snowballed into something grimier, and he perhaps felt a little more resentful towards Paul McCartney or
Right.
but
Yeah.
if you look at it, I mean, look at the guitar solo on Taxman, or the piano on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, or the backing vocals on Something. I mean, this is not someone who's not putting their back into the work.
Oh no, and it's definitely a mature, more of a mature audience type of thing. I mean, this is an adult stuff. I mean, and I'm speaking towards the comment about the 14-year-old audience. I mean,
Oh
look,
yeah,
these are creative, progressive forward, music making that he's doing, helping with George's tracks, and then continuing into the solo career. Yeah, I mean he did a lot of poppy stuff. We know that,
yeah.
but he did also a lot of progressive stuff too. I think of something like Monkberry Moon Delight.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, but he'd also in '75 released a comic book track, Magneto and Titanium and Man, and that was
yeah,
definitely aimed at
true,
14-year-olds. I mean,
but
14-year-olds are the people reading graphic novels.
Right,
yes,
but that's the thing with Paul. Like you could take an album like Venus and Mars, which has got a smattering of all kinds of genres of music on it. Punk, with the rock show. You gave me the answer.
Yeah.
So that's Paul doesn't just write for one audience. He just writes for whatever he
Yeah.
wants, and then it just goes out there in the ether for you to make your judgment on it. So it's yeah,
Well, I mean, Mike Rutherford from Genesis made a similar comment about Genesis in the '80s, where he said everyone talks about An Invisible Touch or the hits, whereas they also had Home by the Sea and these and the Brazilian and all these interesting pieces that
yeah.
were probably superior to the singles, but everyone's focusing on the singles. And
right.
it's misapprehension of the band, and unfortunately, that seems to be a way that everyone judges people on the singles and less so on the albums.
Right. But I mean, yeah, I mean, McCartney too. I mean, as you read the McCartney Legacy book, there's quite a few quotes from him in that book, stating that he would listen to the radio, see what the big hits were of that time, or what the radio was playing, and then kind of sometimes maybe mirror that. So I mean, part of that, I mean, I can agree that maybe sometimes he was playing for a younger audience because, I mean, listen, that's what music's geared towards, right? I mean, the younger audience.
Yeah, but I mean, George Harrison tended to slavishly follow the likes of Robbie Robertson and George Harrison, who tended to write on a more elevated level to say average rock and roll. So perhaps
Right.
by that standard, he might have thought that some of McCartney's work was juvenile. But yeah, like George liked a zinger. He liked to make a zinger about people.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. There'll be more coming in part three for sure.
Yes.
All right, moving to 78. We got the Rutles. All you need is cash premieres. And George does do a cameo. Eric Idle does a parody of Paul McCartney. His name is Dirk McQuickley. And then there's Ricky Fattar as Stig O'Hara. Both are quite amusing parodies. Obviously, this is George's wheelhouse. He loves this kind of comedy. He's friends with the Monty Python. I don't know if I've ever seen any kind of reaction from or quote from Paul about his feelings about how he was portrayed in this show, but it's hilarious to see how Eric Idle portrays
Paul.
yeah.
Well, I can say that Neil Innes has said that Paul McCartney was a bit uncomfortable with some of the jokes.
Yeah. I've
Okay.
read that, and I've read it. There's a quote somewhere that Eric Idle was at a function or a dinner with Paul, and they tried to kind of exchange pleasantries, and it was a little bit awkward. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't remember when or where that was, but I've read that in some book over the years, and it was not the most
Yeah.
heartwarming connection.
Well, I can confirm because Neil Innes answered some questions on Twitter for a pal of mine, and he said that the other three got it, but Paul was a little bit less comfortable with the Rutles than. And Neil Innes, of course, played the John Lennon type and wrote all the songs.
Right. I think with time, though, Paul has probably eased his stance on that, but we don't. Obviously he hasn't addressed it. But I think now Paul can look at it and say they're just taking the Mickey out of us, and it's okay. But back in the '70s, maybe not.
Yeah, well, Ken Michaels said that, as you say, I've been on his show a few times, he said that he felt Idol was a little bit more cutting than the others were towards their Beatles, which, with that lead scene, like, yeah. And in a fantastic book Jim Roberts wrote about the Beatles' humour, he did a lot of interviews with Neil Innes, and Innes himself said that he felt a little uncomfortable with Idol's portrayal, that it was a little bit more cutting. There was more of a sense that he just genuinely couldn't stand McCartney, that it wasn't an affectionate parody.
Yeah. You got to wonder too if George was over there kind of egging him on a little bit, to push him forward. Yeah, push him forward in the way he was going with it. Because it is funny because then he'll do those facial expressions while he's singing. And and you're right too. The piano bit where he's going dee dee. It's very very funny and definitely getting a zinger in on Paul.
I think one of the Rutles songs pushed a little bit too close to the edge. I forget, might have been the
Get
one
Up
that
and Go.
Get up and go.
Get up and go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even John Lennon told them, he said, "You've crossed the line, and that one I'd drop it." And Lennon loved the film, and Yoko loved the film, which is good because she's portrayed as a Nazi in that film.
Yes. That's right.
Yeah, so they both thought it was hysterical. They loved the film, and I think. But to Paul's credit, Ringo was also a little uncomfortable. He found the jokes about the court cases and the manager going to Australia. He found that all a little close to the bone.
Very good. All right.
Again, with time though, I mean, it's still so fresh and raw to everybody. 78, so it's still again with time things kind of get a little bit easier. But for the day, it probably felt a little bit stinging for Paul and Ringo, sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's that joke where Barry One sues himself, which was something. If you read the Peter Doggett book, and I congratulate you guys for the interview you did with Peter Doggett, that was fantastic, top notch.
Oh, thank you.
But you read the "You Never Give Me Your Money" book. That's not far off the truth.
No, not at all, not at all. Moving to '79. George Harrison does this roundtable show for David Kidd Jensen on BBC One. This is a show that had Michael Jackson on it as well. This is February 9th, 1979. And when asking about the Rutles, Jensen asked, what about the other fellows' reactions, John Paul and Ringo? Are you aware about their reactions to the Rutles? Where George responds, no, but they haven't spoken to me since. So, another comical, quote there from George Harrison, which to be expected. I'm really fond of the Rutles. I know there's a lot of fans. I know Neil has appeared at the Beatles Fest several times, and there's a special place in everybody's heart. It's kind of one of those things where it's when you're a younger Beatles fan, your teachers or whatever in your life, they show you the Rutles. It's kind of like one of those secrets that you pick up on later in your Beatle lives. But do you remember the first time you saw the Rutles, Owen?
Yeah, it was in my second year of university when I should have been studying for my exams, and instead I went onto YouTube and just watched the Rutles instead.
Yeah,
and it is just hysterical. Now this is what he said.
Yes.
Nothing. Okay, moving over here. It's Eric Idle's finest hour, I think.
It is, and they're all accomplished musicians in their own right. I mean, I'm not sure how many people know, but Ricky Fataar, who is in that, was part of the Beach Boys. Was part of
Yes.
the Beach
Yes.
Boys with Blondie Chain and was on Holland and toured with them for quite a while. Ended up becoming, I believe, Bonnie Raitt's drummer. I had the chance to
Yes.
meet him
Yeah.
Yeah,
many
he's
many
still
years
alive.
ago.
He's still alive.
And yeah, I met Rick at a record store actually, and just had a nice chat with him for about 5 or 10 minutes. It was nice.
Yeah, and of course, the drummer John Halsey, I think his name is, he played on the Lou Reed's Transformer album.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
So they were top-notch musicians. They weren't like the Spinal Tap,
No.
where it's just actors who are messing around on guitars.
Speaking of which, isn't there going to be a Spinal Tap sequel with Paul's?
Yes.
Isn't there
Yes.
going to be that?
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'll reserve judgment until I see it.
Exactly. I'm not looking forward to it. I wish they would just leave it alone, but
Me too.
we'll see. But you know what? Christopher Guest and Harry Shearer and Michael McKean. I mean, they're improvising champions. I mean, they can improvise with the best of them. So I'm really curious to see how they present the sequel here, which Paul McCartney was I guess is slated to appear in that.
Well, my mother was going to say, I was always a fan of the Tap. I told Lindy and Denny, these guys are really good. And they didn't believe me. And it's like, well, you're laughing now because you both are dead.
Right.
That was a bit soon.
Too soon.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But Paul's gonna be silly in it, and I don't know how I feel about him appearing in the film or not, but whatever. Like you said, we'll reserve judgment.
Yeah, we'll reserve judgment on that till it's out.
Yeah. All right. So 1979 in April, George Harrison does an interview for Rolling Stone magazine. Where he says, "Do you like the music Paul is making now?" Harrison, I think it's inoffensive. I've always preferred Paul's good melodies to his screaming rock and roll tunes. The tune I thought was sensational on the London Town album was I'm Carrying. But all the noisy, beaty things I am not into at all. But then that's not only with Paul's music. So then he goes on and talks about all the other artists that does the loud, beaty things as well. But
what do you think he's referring to with loud, noisy, beaty things with Paul's music at that time? What do you think he's referring to?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe something like that.
More Smoose and the Grey Goose, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe Muckberry Moon Delight, maybe. Who knows? But I love his rockers. He's one of the great rock singers. So
Yes.
What I love about that quote, and it's always fascinated me, is that because it's never said, but and it's rarely do they ever speak of that they've listened to each other's albums, but clearly they all listen to each other's albums, even though they never went on record about it much post breakup. And they may not admit it, but they all listen to each other's albums, and I'm always curious. We never got more sound bites and quotes on what they all thought about their other solo records as they progressed through the 70s.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm fascinated by this. That he says I'm Carrying, that he loves he loves this track, he loves the melody, and you more that you think about it. I mean, George does a lot of that kind of stuff in his solo career. I mean, he's not a rock and roller like we get like he was in the Beatles, right? He's doing, if you want to call it adult contemporary, he's doing a lot of that stuff throughout his catalog.
Yeah. And of course, I'm Carrying has the Gizmotron, and when I interviewed Lol Cream in 2022, I asked him, did Paul McCartney buy it off you? He said, no, you don't ask for money from Paul. Because Lol's got this great laugh, and he said he just got handed, he said, but he's a left-handed bugger, and Lol's so wonderfully Manchester. And yes, I might as well do this shameless plug. In that episode we did a few years ago on 10cc, I said I'd love to interview Lol Cream, and I have done that since.
Awesome.
All right, carrying on with 1979. The former Mrs. George Harrison, Patty Boyd, marries Eric Clapton in Tucson, Arizona. This is May of 19. Paul, George, and Ringo, all three attend. Later that evening, Paul, George, Ringo perform on stage with Clapton and others, including Jagger, Ginger Baker, and Denny Lane. Now, there's photos, or there's said to be photos that have never seen the day of lights. And obviously no one recorded what was going on, but I would imagine that this was probably just a booze-fueled, what's the Lennon and McCartney thing from '76, tooting a snore type.
74.
74.
74.
Thank you. 74 type booze, drug-fueled jam session.
But does anyone want to hear that?
Yeah. Well, according to Keith Badman, which I'm referencing that great book, friends and family take souvenir pictures of the events, although none have appeared in print. Now, let's get a book of that, Paul. Come on.
And Denny Lane said he was really glad that nobody had a tape, which I could understand because they were probably all drunk and they were just fumbling around, just having a good time on stage. It's one of those like a late night out dancing, and then the next day you see the footage that you looked like. Nobody wants to see that.
No. I mean, the fact that Lonnie Donegan was there too is pretty impressive.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned that book. Here it is right here for those, if I'm not frozen or anything like that. You got it right there, too. It's the Beatles after the breakup, 1970 to 2000, day-by-day account of, events, interviews, whatnot, quotes about other Beatles. A really good book.
Quite worn. Quite worn.
Yeah. A lot of fun stuff in that book. So, obviously we know the history of Clapton. The love triangle that was Clapton, Patty, and George. That marriage didn't last that long. Itself, I'm not 100% sure how long it did last, but I think it lasted into the 80s. I don't think it went into the 90s, did it?
No,
do you recall?
No, definitely not. But by the 1991 tour, they definitely split. I think it was about 86 they'd split / divorced.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Patty, as we know, is still she's been a recent guest at the fest the last year or two. One of the top billed guests, especially last year in New York and Chicago.
Last year she was there. This year her sister is going to be at the fest, so that should be interesting. Moving on to 1980, January. Paul
after the incident.
Paul gets into trouble. George sends a telegram stating, thinking of you with love. Keep your spirits high. Nice to have you back home again soon. God bless. Love, George and Olivia. So, even though, George likes to get his zingers in from Paul, there's obviously there's still love there for their relationship. George thinking of his friend as he rots in a jail cell. Going, dee 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 doo doo, on a piano maybe in the jail cell, who knows? But that nice of him to do that though.
Yeah, very, very, very thoughtful, very considerate. I mean, much more considerate than Lennon going to a newspaper saying, "You're a Beatle. If you want weed, you can get weeds," and all that nonsense. Yeah.
I think it always says that no matter what was going on, they all loved each other.
Yes, I mean they were family to the end. I mean, as much as he may have admired Denny Lane and Henry McCulloch and yada yada, they weren't family to him the way that the Beatles were family to him.
No.
I think I mean, although I do think he was quite upset. Paul McCartney was quite upset by the breakup of Wings. I said this on the Ken Michaels show. That Ken Michaels said that it was Paul McCartney's decision, but I said, yeah, but even though it was his decision to end it, it's still a breakup, and he had worked with Denny Lane for over a decade, and now it's all come to an end. And now it's come to an end. And it sounds like the relationship was fairly rocky for a few years afterwards, probably because of the split.
Yeah.
Right. August 1980, Paul does Musician magazine, which later ends up becoming the McCartney interview album. Very telling. I mean, we know the history of Paul and George and the Beatles. He's this Vic Garbarini, the guy that conducted the interview. He asked Paul, there was some. Did musical disagreements or conflicts have anything to do with the breakup? And Paul's answer to that was, there was some of the minor reasons. They were some of the minor reasons, yeah. I remember on Hey Jude telling George not to play guitar. He wanted to echo after the vocal phrases, echo riffs after the vocal phrases, which I didn't think was appropriate. He didn't see it like that. And it was a bit of a number for me to have to dare to tell George Harrison, who's one of the greats, I think, not to play. It was like an insult, but that was how we did a lot of our stuff. So obviously, people bringing in ideas, the person that brings the song in would agree or disagree. I don't think a guitar riff would, echoing a vocal line was probably appropriate either. Andy, what say you?
For Hey Jude? No.
Yeah, for
Paul.
Jude.
Paul was in the right with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have ended up sounding like something like November Rain, just gauche and overblown and tasteless and tacky. And it would that's why the song is brilliant, because it starts with the piano, acoustic guitar, drums, and it slowly builds up to the closing crescendo where it's almost where it stems of opera. And George, of course, may have done a dig himself on the "Isn't It a Pity" recording,
Yes.
where at the end, where the close of that track, he has singers going like, da,
Yeah.
da, da, da.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a call and response on Hey Jude with a guitar is just not needed, and
No, it's not.
it was perfection as needed, and that was one where George had to concede. Okay, you're Paul McCartney, I'm George Harrison, and it's okay.
Yeah, but I think it was just how that for George Harrison as someone who never prided himself as a singer or a songwriter, but he prided himself as a guitar player. That was a burst to the ego. It's one thing for George Martin to say put the guitar away, or when it's the guy you shared the bus with when you were 8 is telling you, I don't want this guitar solo.
Right.
It's gonna sting.
And as George said in the anthology, there was a lot of ego in that band.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Go ahead.
Of course, there's a story about Peter Frampton going up to George Harrison saying, I loved your guitar solo. I think it was on Taxman, or it was either Peter Frampton or Lindsey Buckingham. And of course, George Harrison says, that wasn't me. And then he names another track, this guitar solo. He's like, that was also Paul. And it just goes on and on. So that must have stung a bit. And I love the indelible, humble, infectious guitar solos were either John Lennon or Paul McCartney. And it's George Harrison's meant to be the lead guitar player.
Right. And that's not the first time it happens, too, because on that BBC roundtable he does with Michael Jackson in '79, they're talking about something, and then Michael Jackson said that was one of his favorite Lennon McCartney, and Jared was like, no, that's me.
Yeah.
And then Michael Jackson's like, well, I thought that was Lennon McCartney, and George responds, yeah, so does everybody. Thinks that, too.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Sinatra would say, this is my favorite, the Lennon McCartney track.
McCartney, yeah, exactly. So, poor George. But anyways, moving on to 1981, we're going to finish with this year for this installment. But early 1981, okay, so there's the track All Those Years Ago, which, if you want to believe it, there's conflicting stories whether or not this was intended for Ringo. Ringo says, yeah, he did. George did send him a demo of this, which he didn't think he cared for. So he sent it back to George. And then after John's death, obviously George reworks the tune. I think the backing demo stays the same, and then just George changes the lyrics to reflect on John's death. Now, Paul is also working on Tug of War at the time, and he would like a guitar solo for Wanderlust. So in early 1981, Paul, Linda, Denny, George, and Jeff Emmerich go to Friar Park, where George is working on sometime in or somewhere in England, LP. They contribute backing vocals to All Those Years Ago, and then Paul's requesting guitar solo, which he never does. I think he expresses that it doesn't need a guitar solo. Yeah, which I completely agree with. But the fact that this is the first time since I Me Mine that George, Paul, and Ringo are on a track together with All Those Years Ago.
And what a terrible track it is, too.
I know you're joking.
No, I think it's an awful track. I genuinely do. I think it's hackneyed, and I'm sorry, Ken Michaels, if you're watching this or any of the other listeners. I really don't rate that track.
You don't like Wanderlust.
Oh no, all those years ago I was talking about. Oh, Wanderlust is the perfection. I'm so sorry.
To each his own.
You know,
Yeah.
Wanderlust is in the top three McCartney tracks, with or without the Beatles. It's just perfection. I thought you were
Yeah.
talking about all those years ago.
No. Wanderlust. Wanderlust.
No wonder. I can't praise. As I agree with what you guys said. I said this on the Ken Michaels show that on Wanderlust, it did need a guitar solo. It's perfect. I really can't think of anything George Harrison could have contributed to it.
Yeah.
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 I agree. There's some fun photos. There's some fun Linda Polaroid photos that maybe we can share with their time at Friar Park with George, with the two Georges and Paul and Denny, sharing a cup of tea or whatnot. But
Yeah.
so you prefer for tributes to John here today? What are your thoughts on that, Owen? I mean, is that a better tribute to John? You think over all those
Much
years?
better. Much better, but I think it also was McCartney had taken some time. It was 18 months, 2 years later, so he had this very finely written tribute. Whereas a lot of people, Dave Gilmour, George Harrison, they released tributes perhaps a little too quickly when they hadn't. They say you shouldn't write a tribute so soon after someone's death
Yeah.
because you haven't accepted it. By 1982, McCartney had not perhaps it had not the fullness had not come on, but he was still the shock had gone,
It-
and it was so he was able to show a more realized track, like he shows about how the two of them couldn't cry, whereas Harrison's much more hagiographic and much more Lennon could do no wrong, and he was basically a messianic figure, which I don't even think John Lennon would have appreciated.
No, he wouldn't have. And it's a good point that you make there, Owen, because it would. And besides the fact that the song was written prior to Lennon's death and then was kind of tweaked to change, lends it
Yeah.
to your
Released in
agreement.
released in May of '81. I think it goes to number 2. I think Betty Davis Eyes is the track that keeps it from hitting number 1.
Right. So I think
But,
things like the late great Johnny Ace by Paul
Right.
Simon and of course Empty Garden by Elton John
Oh, fantastic!
were much better tributes.
Or Queen's "Life Is Real" that has one of Freddie Mercury's best vocals.
Yes, from I believe Hot Space, right?
Yeah, an album I will defend to the grave. I think it's in the top 5 of Queen.
There you go.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, April 27, 1981. Ringo marries Barbara Bach in Merrily Born.
Marylebone.
Thank you, Town Hall.
You're welcome.
Yeah. George and Paul attend. There's a great photo, a group photo. We'll post here too as well. With all three of them and their wives, and a couple of kids in the picture as well. I think they're standing behind the cake or whatnot. Great little photo of them together. It's just really cool to see them, at these events together. Sharing their love together, I guess. Whether or not they're always getting along, is another question. But seeing them support each other and appearing at these events from time to time, which didn't happen a lot, come 1970, or even during the Beatles. I mean, they all didn't attend their weddings and whatnot. So to see this was pretty cool.
Yeah, curiously, Yoko wasn't invited, which she said she was quite hurt by it. That she said that she would have liked to have been told the wedding was happening.
Okay. Yeah, because Ringo and Barbara do show up, I think, at Yoko's place not long after of John's passing.
The next day.
Yeah.
The next day. So I kind of maybe 4 months later, maybe they just felt that they wanted to give her space. It had only been 4 months since he had passed. I don't know.
She was right to say that someone should have said. She should have been told they were getting married, and she should have been told the wedding is happening, and had the option of coming or not.
Yeah,
agreed. And then she would have respectfully declined.
She wouldn't have gone, but the extension should have been made. Agreed.
100%. Yeah, no, it's one of the clumsier oversights.
Right. October 81, Stop and Smell the Roses is released. This is Ringo's first album of the 80s. Again, Paul and George contribute songs. George contributes "Rack My Brain," which is Ringo's first and last, or well, not his first, but I mean his last top 40 hits. His first since I think "Hey Baby" or "Dose of Rock and Roll." I think "Dose of Rock and Roll" from '76. And then Paul contributes new songs, "Private Property" and "Tension." For my money, again, I think George knows Ringo very well and writes "Rack My Brain," which I think is 10 times better than both "Private Property" and "Attention." "Rack My Brain" is a single as well as "Private Property." "Attention." So there was two singles from this album. With "Rack My Brain" and "Private Property." Owen, what are your thoughts on the tracks?
I'd agree with your summation, but I might add that George actually had written a couple of songs with Ringo. I mean, there's "Photograph," which has the Harrison Starkey co-writing credit.
Right.
Harrison did a lot of uncredited work on Octopus's Garden and "It Don't Come Easy," so they'd worked on a one-to-one level. So in the same way that McCartney would know Lennon on an intimate level because they worked on so many songs, I think George had the advantage because he had worked with Ringo on that level, so he knew his strengths and he knew his limitations. Whereas Paul tended to write songs, and if he didn't want to sing them, then maybe Ringo could sing them.
Right. I always thought that they were a great team because I mean you think of something like early 1970, which features George on guitar. You got "Back Off Boogaloo."
Yeah.
Like I said, you got "Photograph," "It Don't Come Easy." These tracks that George and Ringo worked on together throughout the 70s. There should have been more of that. I mean, there's a lot of potential, hit-making potential with that combo, and it was too bad that we didn't get more of that into the later '70s and then throughout the '80s.
I mean, maybe some of them were too busy sleeping with each other's wives for that.
Well, there you go. Ching, ching.
Just read Patty Boyd's book. She asked Ringo Starr for permission to include that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean. Yeah, it's if you know the story, you know the story. We don't have to do that here, but yeah, I mean, but that was its time. I mean, George, the fact that George and Ringo stayed friends after that incident, I mean, it says a lot. And
of course, don't they talk about the suing each other on Aspel and Company in around 87 or 88?
The last time George was angry with me is when he was suing me.
Right.
I said, all right, George, you can sue me. I'm always happy.
Yeah, that was for the "I'll Always Love You" song. George,
yes.
Ringo changes the arrangement. I think George does not like that. So yeah, fun stuff there. That's a great.
Although I think that Aspel thing was a dig at McCartney, that if these two could get over a lawsuit, why couldn't McCartney get over a lawsuit? Which happened, the 1985 lawsuit where Ono, Starkey, and Harrison were suing him for the 1% extra he was getting, which you guys discussed with Peter Dollars.
Re-signing with Capital. Yeah. So we'll get into that in part 3. So that'll be one of the.
Yeah, and obviously with the lawsuits, and then it becomes much more juicier headlines, and of course the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and everything else into the 90s, and lots of vitriol there.
Yeah. Right.
But by 1981, the 3 surviving Beatles, the 4 surviving Beatles. Let's not forget Pete Best, who often gets overlooked and is a lovely, lovely man. I've met him twice. But the 3 guys, they're like uncles to each other's children, and they're acting like family members. And it seems to be they seem to be going on pretty okay outside of the music business.
Yeah, true. Yeah, good point. All right, well, that's going to do it for this installment of our look at George and Paul's relationship after the breakup Beatles. Owen, you got anything else coming up through the pipeline? Any more writings? You working on a new book or anything like that? Anything you can share with us?
Well, actually, just today, my interview with Genesis guitarist Steve Hackett has just been published. So
very nice.
Yes, I saved that deliberately. You can find it on pennyblackmusic.co.uk. He was very funny, Steve Hackett. He said, I think the public school system kind of fucked up the other guys in the band. So he talked about how Banks and Gabriel, were very, swords at dawn kind of stuff. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's congratulations, Owen. Wow, what a
Thank you.
score. That's fantastic. I cannot wait to read that.
Okay, that's very kind. Yeah, he was very generous with his time and his answers. But I do sympathise with Steve Hackett. Being in a band with Rutherford, Banks, and Gabriel. All of them are very. No, it's my idea. No. I'm doing this, and I mean, and Hackett actually championed Phil Collins, who was a Londoner, had stage experience. He's all, come on, guys, it's just music, innit? Be easy.
The two outsiders infiltrating those Charterhouse boys. The dynamic.
I know, yeah.
Come on.
And the amount of abuse Phil Collins gets from the music presses and the fans is just unbearable. It's only on a tier lower to the abuse that Yoko Ono gets.
It's true, because in truth, as you know, Owen, he's the one that wanted to keep the progressive heavy stuff going in there, poppiness in the 80s.
100%.
He wanted to play Supper's Ready on the Invisible Touch Door, the whole thing, and only Banks and Rutherford said, no, we'll just do a little bit of a snippet.
Yeah, 100%. And he's the one coming in with these weird time sigs, and he was much more successful as a singer than Peter Gabriel ever was from day one.
Yes.
He was always much more successful, much more. Fans lapped him up. It's only posterity that people have said, "Oh, I was always Peter Gabriel was more authentic."
Right, and to your earlier point that you made, it's just about how people always identify with the hits. It's like, how shallow can people think about identifying an artist just by the 2 or 3 songs that got to the top of the hit parade?
Yeah.
Open your ears, people.
Yeah, but in Tony Banks' defense as well, his favorite album is Wind and Wuthering, which is like the proggiest album in the canon, and it's one of Steve Hackett's favorites as well.
Yeah, the most romantic one, I would think, right?
Yeah, it's the one where they're reading 18th century books and then they're writing. It's my favorite Genesis album. I just think it's fantastic.
It's up there. Rutherford, I think, is kind of this way, that way with it, but I know Tony Banks likes it the most.
Yeah, Rutherford made that joke in an interview. He says Tony and Steve love it more than the others. So he said, obviously, I can't love it if they love it.
Yeah. That is what an interview, and I can't wait to read that. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm negotiating with no other member of Genesis, but I can't name him at the moment.
Oh, very good.
Okay.
All right, can't wait for that. But should mention that we just got a remastered new video for Mamonia
Yes.
that premiered. While this is going, it's a week old already. Andy, did you get a chance to see the video?
I did. Again, these 4K upgrades that just get dropped with little to no fanfare, no PR, no anything. You go on YouTube and you see that a new video is dropping, and I did watch it, crystal clear. It's sped up a little bit too much for my liking. I think it just needs to be just a tad slower, but obviously fantastic quality. Animated. If you've never seen the Mamunia video, it's animated and with lyrics and stuff like that, and the Plastic Max and all those things. So, job well done as usual.
Yeah. It's got some great work from Danny Lane on that track as well. He's such a loss to the world of music, and I know I made that joke earlier, but Danny Lane's influence on Wing is second only to Paul McCartney's, and his work with the Moody Blues was unsurmountable, and he was quite the talent. I don't think he quite got his due as a member of Wings that he deserved.
I agree with you. The track's never been one of my favorites in the Wings catalog. Hard to believe that they did this video because it was going to be a single.
It was.
And I'm so glad that this was not a single, to be honest with you.
I wish it was, because it's probably my favorite track on the album.
Yeah.
Wow, you heard it here first, folks.
It's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites too. Yeah.
There you go, Owen. Nice to be in good company with you there.
It's very Irish. It's all about rainfall and it ain't bad, and finding the celebration of the inclement weather. Yeah.
And especially towards the last third of the song when the synths come in and everything, that's fantastic. That I've always enjoyed that. And the bongos going with the synths and then the chanting back and forth. I think it is one of the forever. I've loved that song forever. ever and ever and ever. Should have been a single. Sorry, Tom.
No, I agree, and it's probably the most African influenced track on the album, which considering
Yes.
that they're in
Yeah,
Lagos.
I can agree with you there. Yeah, absolutely. But that's going to do it for this installment of Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. Thank you all for joining. Oh, and my friend, you are welcome whenever you want to be here. We are so excited to have you back on, and we look forward to having you back on for part 3 of this series. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Two Legs Podcast. Any thoughts, show ideas? We just got one yesterday that I was going to talk with Andy about maybe doing a ballad show about our favorite love songs. Maybe we can talk about that for a Valentine's Day show or something like that. Send your emails to twolegspodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing your comments. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts about what we talked about on this episode, and the words that George and Paul had about each other through interviews. Thank you for subscribing to the YouTube channel. We're inching closer to 2K subscribers on YouTube, and we really appreciate all of you guys checking out the show. So that being said, for Andy Nichols, Owen Lyng, I'm Tom Hunyadi saying have a great day and a beautiful night. Take care, everyone.
Listening to Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast, hosted by Tom Hunyadi and Andy Nichols, with musical contributions by Dylan